In this lesson, we'll learn a little bit about the importance of composition and layout when it comes to our graphic design projects. Alright, great. So I've got the Lesson 9 Begin file open here in front of me. Now, again, if you've watched Kurt's Fundamentals of Art course, then a lot of the principles that he spoke, actually all of the principles that he spoke about when he was talking about composition, are going to apply to graphic design as well as art. So coming in here and taking a look, you can see here on this first spread, and when I say spread I mean the left page and the right page, kind of what I've got laid out here is simply a brochure. Now this is a brochure I've designed for another course here at Digital Tutors, but let's go ahead and take a look here. We have here the front side of the brochure, and we have the inside of the brochure. So this is intended to be a bifold brochure, meaning there's two creases here. We've got one here and one right about here. And so what we're looking at here on the back of the brochure, this is going to be the cover. It's going to fold here. This is going to be the center panel, and then another fold, and then we're going to have the back panel. So now when it comes to composition, like I said, all of those principles are still going to be important and applicable to graphic design. Things like movement, contrast, proximity, rhythm, emphasis, balance, variety, and unity. So again, all these are still applicable here. So again, this particular project, being that it's a brochure, it needs to be solid compositionally when it's fully spread out like this, but it also needs to be solid compositionally when you're looking at just one panel at a time. Because if someone has got it folded up, let me just come in here and draw a box and cover up portions of this. If someone was just looking at the very front, this is the entire composition as according to what they're seeing. So it needs to be solid compositionally here. Then if we were to come in and maybe take a look here at just the center panel, this needs to be compositionally sound. And again, the back panel needs to be compositionally sound as well. Now, keeping in mind in the Western world, we read left to right, so naturally our eyes are going to enter into the composition from the top left-hand corner. So as we enter into this composition, you can see here that the first thing we're going to run across, obviously, is this nice, pretty image. But being that this is a brochure meant to sell products, imagery is one really valuable tool to sell products like that. So, but you can see here that we've also focused on keywords throughout this brochure. Now let's take a look at some of these concepts that Kurt spoke about and kind of identify where we can spot these here within this design. So I'm going to go ahead and bring back our boxes here, and let's just kind of take a look at this one panel right here. So again, thinking about movement and the eye entering the composition from the top left, it comes in here and it's going to hit this text and naturally be kind of carried down through this panel. Now, there's a lot of contrast here because we have these really bright, vivid images on this white background. You can also see that there's contrast in the text itself, being that the big words that we're calling out, there's a very large difference in size compared to the body copy that's below those. Looking at the proximity of objects here together, everything seems to fit rather nicely. There's no uncomfortable proximities that I'm picking up with my eye. Now, obviously, we have half of this lamp hanging off of the brochure here, but it's obviously intentional. It's not like this lamp was just barely touching the edge of the brochure right here. If that was the case, then we'd have sort of a little bit of a visual distraction going on. Anytime two objects are just barely touching, oftentimes that's referred to as a tangent. Can also really distract, and your eye is going to go right to something like that. So there's actually rhythm in this piece as well. So thinking about looking at type as more than just words on a page and more than just the written word, you can see here that these blocks of type all are sort of a rectangular shape. So we've got kind of a nice rhythm going with those. And, we've got both single column blocks, and we've got blocks that are wider and take up 2 columns. And as we move over here to the other side as well, you can see kind of a nice balance of wider blocks of text as well as these thinner blocks, these narrower blocks. So there's sort of a rhythm that is working there as well. Now, on top of that, we have kind of a rectangular shape for all the images. So with the exception of this lamp that we're highlighting kind of the design of that lamp, we have a nice rhythm going on here. We talked about the big bright images on the white background, and really that is this is a design that is emphasizing the images as well. So thinking about balance, we have a nice balance going on here. We have quite a bit of white space around the different elements here, and we're allowing some of these elements to breathe. We don't want to fill every square inch of a design, because the design isn't so much how much information and how you fit it together, but it's also about strategic placement of white space or negative space within the design. Now, looking at both the front and the back of this brochure, there's a nice variety of things going on, both colors and as well as elements of all shapes and sizes. And looking at the entire thing together, it has a sense of unity. We have common colors that have been picked out. We have typefaces that match other typefaces. There's a limited number of typefaces. We have kind of this title face here, then we have these subtitles here, and then we have these body copy that are all going to be the same typeface. So we're not just going crazy with a lot of different fonts within the design. There is some consistency and some unity with that. So again, just a few moments here talking about this brochure, we can see that all of these principles of composition that Kurt spoke about in his course are still applicable to design. Now, when you're dealing with large amounts of information like this, there is an inherent grid structure that you can use to sort of hang these design elements on, if you will. So what I've got here on these next few pages I wanted to show you is 3 very simple grid systems that you can employ. Now, depending on the type of project that you're working on, obviously the grid systems aren't intended to be only used on certain types of projects, but knowing that these are here, these can be sort of a compositional assist for you as you're laying out a project. So this first grid right here, you can see these 2 gray boxes. It's a very simple manuscript grid. Now, this is something that if you've ever picked up a book and read it, and I'm speaking specifically of kind of a novel, they all use a manuscript grid. Now, the reason being is because the most important thing is the information, and there's actually a lot of information. So for a layout using a manuscript grid, you would look at probably something sort of like this. You may have some other design elements here kind of adorning the pages, but really the focus is on the content, on the information. The next type of grid that I wanted to show you really quickly is a column grid. Now again, this is just a way for you to begin arranging your compositional elements. Things that you can do to make sure that there is consistency, especially if you're working with a project that has multiple pages to it. So the design of one page looks similar to the design of maybe one that's 50 pages away from it. They all have a certain consistency to them, unity. So again, a column grid is the same type of thing. You can hang your different elements off of these grids. Now, column grid obviously can be any number of columns that you need it to be. This particular one is a 6-column grid. You can see 6 columns on each page. And if we come down here, you can see the way I utilized that column grid here was to basically create 2 columns of text per page, but we've got some different design elements here as well. So because I have 6 columns doesn't necessarily mean I need to utilize all 6 of them all of the time. So grids provide flexibility. So let's take a look at one last type of grid here. This is called a modular grid. Now, if I go ahead and zoom out just a little bit on that, you can see that a modular grid just is simply composed of modules. Now, Again, no set number of modules. It's all up to you, even as to if you have sort of this spacing or padding between your modules. Again, completely up to you. So this is the grid that I opted to use for this particular layout. So let's come down here and see this grid in action. So again, not using every single module, but I have those modules available to me if I wanted to, say, call out some information sort of like this here. Now, if we look over here, one might think, well, that kind of looks like a column grid, but that's because of the elements I opted to use in this design. So these strong vertical bars that really grab your eye. But again, we're using a modular grid. So we have the flexibility to really create some interesting compositional things going on here. So when it comes to grids, one thing you should know is that they're going to feel a little awkward at first until you get used to using them. Initially they may seem kind of restrictive or kind of confining, but really they add a lot of flexibility to your design and really provide this underlying structure for your design that can make it feel very cohesive. So what I'd like to do at this point is I'd like to go ahead and move on to the next lesson, and I'd like to work through a little exercise with you and show you how you can set up your own grid-based design here inside of InDesign.